It isn't the absence you remember most, it's the effort. The effort to be noticeable without being disruptive, to exist without asking too much, to sense when attention might arrive and when it wouldn't. You learned early how to stand still in a room full of movement, how to wait without expecting, how to read faces for signs that someone might finally look your way. You don't remember thinking, I'm unseen. You remember adjusting, lowering your voice, shrinking your needs, finding ways to be useful instead of present. And usefulness worked. People noticed you when you helped, when you listened, when you stayed calm while others unraveled, so you did more of that. You became observant, careful, quietly, reliable. Those traits followed you forward in time into friendships where you became the listener, into relationships where you understood before being understood, into spaces where your presence was felt but rarely acknowledged. You were there, just not reflected. There's a particular sensation that comes with that kind of existence. You can be surrounded by people and still feel transparent, as if you're occupying space without leaving an outline. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, that being low maintenance is a strength, that independence is admirable, and in many ways it is. But something subtle happens when you're rarely mirrored. You stop expecting to be. You don't share thoughts unless they're fully formed. You don't express emotion unless it's convenient. You don't reach for comfort unless you're certain it won't burden anyone. Reaching feels risky because you learn what happens when no one responds. So instead of reaching outward, you refined your inner world. You learned how to sit with questions without answers, how to process emotion internally, how to soothe yourself quietly. That skill became invisible. People praised your maturity, your depth, your ability to handle things on your own. They didn't see the loneliness built into that self-sufficiency. You became good at noticing others. You could tell when someone needed space, when they needed reassurance, when they needed to be heard. You offered it instinctively. And in offering, you felt briefly connected. But once the moment passed, the attention moved on. You remained still aware, still present, still unacknowledged. That pattern settled deep. You learned not to expect reciprocity, not because you didn't want it, because expecting it hurt too much. So you stopped expecting. That decision shaped how you relate now. You don't assume people will notice when you're struggling. You don't trust that silence will be met with curiosity. You don't believe absence will be questioned. You keep going. You function. You show up when needed. But there's a quiet distance between you and the world, not chosen, accumulated. People often mistake that distance for strength. They say you're grounded, resilient, independent. They don't ask how you learned to be that way. They don't see how often you learn to disappear emotionally in order to stay connected physically. You became excellent at being agreeable without being known. And that has consequences. You feel deeply, but you hesitate to share. You crave closeness, but you brace for disappointment. You want to be seen, but you don't trust the gaze to last. So you regulate yourself. You don't overreact. You don't demand attention. You don't insist on being understood. You adapt. That adaptation feels natural now. So natural that you forget it was learned until moments like this. Moments where you realize how difficult it is to ask for help. How foreign it feels to be the center of care. How uncomfortable it is when someone focuses on you without asking anything in return. You don't know what to do with that attention. Part of you wants it. Part of you waits for it to disappear. You've learned that attention is temporary. So you don't rest inside it. You stay ready, ready to step back, ready to manage alone, ready to continue without acknowledgement. That readiness has shaped your inner world. You process life quietly. You carry complexity without display. You hold emotion without release. And while others may admire your depth, they don't feel the weight of it. They don't feel how often you wonder what it would be like to be noticed without performing, to be seen without contributing, to be valued without being useful. Those questions rarely make it to the surface. You answer them by continuing on, by being capable, by being supportive, by being steady. But steadiness isn't the same as being held, and you've lived long enough to know the difference. You don't resent the past. You don't blame anyone. You just notice patterns, how you instinctively make space for others, how you minimize your own presence, how you feel safest when you're the one observing rather than being observed. Those patterns didn't appear randomly. They formed when being seen wasn't guaranteed, and now they shape how you move through every relationship. You don't demand visibility, you wait for it, and when it doesn't arrive, you don't protest, you adapt again. But something about that quiet adaptation is beginning to feel heavy. Not wrong, heavy. Like carrying a version of yourself that was shaped in response to absence and never given permission to set that weight down. That realization hasn't fully formed yet. For now, it sits just beneath the surface, in the way you hesitate before speaking, in the way you downplay your experiences, in the way you're used to being overlooked without making it a story. And beneath all of that, a question lingers. What does it do? To a person to grow up learning how to exist without being seen. Over time, you begin to notice that the distance you feel isn't coming from the outside anymore. It's internal now, not as a wall, more like a pause that never quite releases your present in conversations. But part of you stays slightly behind the moment. You listen carefully, but you don't fully arrive. You connect, but you remain prepared to disengage. That preparedness feels normal to you, necessary. From the outside, it can look like emotional control, like composure, like strength. But inside, it's something else. It's anticipation. You're anticipating the moment when attention shifts away, when interest fades, when your presence is no longer needed. So you don't lean too far in. You've learned what happens when you do. This is where the midpoint quietly turns. What looks like emotional distance now isn't a lack of care. What feels like withdrawal isn't disinterest. What others might call detachment is something far more precise. It's an adaptation that never had a reason to turn off. When you grow up feeling unseen, your mind doesn't stop seeking recognition. It stops expecting it. That difference changes everything. You don't ask to be noticed. You don't wait to be acknowledged. You make yourself sufficient before the need can arise. You become observant instead of expressive, reliable instead of receptive, present instead of prioritized. These traits serve you well. You function, you succeed, you navigate complexity with ease, but they also shape the way you relate to others in ways that are easy to miss. You don't assume people are curious about your inner world. You don't offer yourself unless invited repeatedly. You don't trust that your absence would be felt, so you stay out even when you feel alone. This is the psychological truth in the final third. Empaths who grew up feeling unseen, often develop a lifelong habit of self-erasure in subtle forms, not disappearing physically but emotionally. They don't take up space, they don't interrupt,